Electronic music and groove. When you combine these two things together, you get extra saucy beats. This is obviously subjective, but when I think of electronic music that has like a certain groove to it, there's oftentimes a human or acoustic element, which really all comes down to accents and velocity. This technique in theory can be applied to anything that's rhythmic, so we'll be focusing on drum sequences as well as a melodic sequence. This channel focuses mostly on gear, so if you have any sort of synth, drum machine, any sort of software that sequences, this video is for you. If you're sort of just dipping your feet into sequencing, you don't have any synth or anything that sequences, I've left a link to a free sequencer called Sequencer. Description. And if not that one, there's a ton of other free software sequencers online. They're not difficult to find. Today's sponsor is DistroKid, and chances are that if you're on this channel, you make experimental or synth music. If you're looking to distribute that music to major platforms, DistroKid is a great option to go with. They offer all sorts of free promotional tools to help you release your music, and there's one specifically called Hyperfollow that I've used on literally every track that I've released. And I'll be showing you how to use that later in this video. My instrument of choice today is the TR6S, simply because it has a very simple demonstration of using velocity within your sequences. It also happens to be a dope instrument. If you want to get deep into this technique, there is a little bit of music theory involved. For those of you who are music theory savvy, I've actually left a PDF in the description that explains each rule of this theory. The groove theory. It works, and to credit this theory, I actually studied jazz performance in university, and our teacher had all of us using this technique, and it works. That being said, this isn't jazz, so we won't be getting too deep into it. We're just going to stick to the basic parts of this theory. Here is the backbone of the pattern we're going to be starting with. This simple pattern actually demonstrates the first rule of Fight Club.
The first rule of Fight Club is?
The first rule of this theory. Downbeats are accented. Downbeats meaning beats 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I was to count along with this, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You're just sort of drilling it into the ground with these downbeats. This is the driving force of this beat. So in Western music, you oftentimes have 4 on the floor, in which case every downbeat is accented. Or you could have what's called the backbeat, in which case beats 2 and 4 are accented. Or in this case, you have both. So that's simple rule number 1 and the foundational part of this pattern. What about the layers and rhythms that are happening underneath that? Let's incrementally add parts to this. We're going to experiment with velocity and see how much of an effect it's actually having. I'm literally just going to hit random notes. There we go. Let's take this one out. So this is very straightforward, and it actually sounds good as is, obviously depending on what style of music you're going for. But let's implement the groove theory.
Second rule of Fight Club is?
The second rule is that notes that are followed by spaces are accented. So in this case, it would be this note because it's followed by a space. Same with this one, you get the point. So I'm literally just going to accent these, bring the velocity up to maybe 100. Doesn't have to be exact for each one. I'm also going to drop the velocity of the notes that are preceding the accented notes, so it makes that accent stand out even more. So this one and these two as well. So now let me show you a before and after of this. There's just a lot more to latch on to rhythmically. So let's say you wanted to accent those notes even more. Maybe you could add an open hi-hat to those notes. We'll do the exact same thing now, but with conga. I'll point out that this is where the technique is especially useful when you're using a sample that is acoustic. At this point, the conga is sounding kind of square and and it's just polluting the groove overall. Same thing as before, we're going to accent the notes that are followed by spaces. So I'm really going to accent them. And once again, I'm really going to bring down the velocity of the notes that are preceding the accented notes. Doesn't need to be perfect. That's a huge difference. Like, it's not even a comparison. Almost sounds like a live conga player. Maybe not like a professional, professional conga player, but maybe more like an amateur one. But still, you get my point. It takes it a step further to sounding more groovy and maybe a bit more human and acoustic. The power of velocity. So I've gone ahead and found a melodic tone, although it's still very rhythmic, and I've done the exact same thing. Here's the before and after of that. It's such a simple technique, but that extra craft and polish makes a world of difference. Now, is this theory used everywhere? Yes and no. It really depends on the type of sound that you're going for. If you want your rhythms to sound more square, electronic, and maybe industrial, then you could just ditch the accents. But this is just an impressive tool to pull out of your bag of tricks if and when the time comes. With this take, we're venturing a little bit more into musicianship as opposed to like hardcore synth technical stuff. You know what I'm saying? Now, let's talk about that DistroKid feature, Hyperfollow. Yes, this is a sponsored message, but if you're a DistroKid user and you're not taking advantage of Hyperfollow, then you're missing out. It's free and you've got nothing to lose. Here's how to use it. Everyone has a link tree on their social media these days. Here's my link tree. One of these links is a link to my music, so tap on that. And that brings you to my Hyperfollow page, which is essentially a link to my latest release. So now your audience actually has a choice of choosing the platform that they use. Instead of assuming that everyone uses Spotify, I mean, most people do. But for the ones that aren't, now they have a choice to pick other platforms that they do use. DistroKid has a bunch of other features to help promote your music, which is pretty important these days as a DIY musician. So make sure to give that a peek. If you're looking for a way to distribute your own music, there is a 7% discount link on your first year, linked in my bio. All right, well, that pretty much wraps this thing up. Hopefully this helps your sequences groove a little bit more. If you're into this sort of content, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. I publish videos like this every few days. Also, something new, I invite you to check out my online store, which is linked below this video. There's a bunch of fun, cute, niche synth type gifts and merchandise that you could choose from, so make sure to check that out. That is a wrap.